Thank you all for joining us for the ACEEE Summer Study Panel 13, Advancing Equity and Energy Efficiency, Model Programs, Engagement, and Language. ACEEE hosted the first Energy Efficiency and Equity Panel in 2018 in recognition of a need to better embed equity in our work in the built environment. The focus of this panel is to dedicate time to make sense of what equity and energy efficiency actually means and move beyond the thinking that equity is simply a low-income program. The COVID-19 crisis has exacerbated existing issues of economic and racial inequality, as well as housing and energy affordability. The 400 years of oppression that led to our most recent racial justice uprisings has had far-reaching impacts on frontline organizations, environmental and social justice, and civil rights organizations. This is a powerful time to lift up the structural issues that limited wealth and Black, Brown, Latino, Indigenous, Asian Pacific Islander, and people of color-led communities have faced for decades and have been largely ignored. Our hope is that we are on a trajectory to not only better integrate equity into our work, but also to create lasting, renewed energy, healthy housing, economic and environmental solutions that are led by impacted communities. For our paper authors and panelists, we're really grateful for the trust you have had in us to lift up both the pressing issues and the community-based solutions to be presented on this panel, and for your partnership. I will now turn it over to my amazing co-chair, Chandra Farley, Just Energy Director with Partnership for Southern Equity, to go over some housekeeping items before we introduce our speakers.
Thanks so much, Jen. I'm super excited that we have finally made it to this day. And thanks to all of the attendees for joining us for this session. I'm going to go over some housekeeping items and thank our sponsors. So your screen is customizable. Feel free to make the various windows as large or as small as you would like. You can even minimize them to the drop-down menu at the bottom of your screen, and you can click through the widgets at the bottom of the screen to be sure you aren't missing any of the options available. Presentations can be downloaded as PDFs from the presentation list in the menu, and all attendees are in listen-only mode, but we welcome you to submit questions through the Q&A box at any time during the webcast. The Q&A can be accessed in the menu at the bottom of your screen if it is not already visible. Jen and I will monitor questions as they come in to inform our conversation following the presentations. All presentations will be available for on-demand viewing within a few days on the Engagement Hub. Later this afternoon, after the panel sessions, informal sessions and social times will be offered through Zoom links. To access these sessions, you'll find the links in the session icons on your menu bar. On behalf of ACEEE, we'd also like to recognize and thank our sponsors for this. For supporting this event. So we'd like to thank all of our gold sponsors, as you see here on the screen. Thank you to our silver sponsors. And thank you to our bronze sponsors. Again, on behalf of ACEEE, Jen and I and panel 13, thanks to our sponsors, and we look forward to getting started with our session.
Okay. So today we're working to bring in the dynamic energy that we had in the room at Asilomar in 2018 when we were all able to be together in person. So just know we're so excited to be able to do this virtually, and really just are grateful for those of you who are returning to this session today. We have 4 amazing leaders and technical experts who will be leading us through our conversation today. After Carmelita Miller provides some initial framing, each of our panelists will have 10 minutes to present, and we will hold all questions to the end. But as Chandra just mentioned, as our speakers are presenting, please do use the Q&A function to lift up any questions that you have for them in the chat. Our first presenter is Carmelita Miller, who directs Greenlining Institute's Energy Equity Team. Her work focuses on maximizing the benefits of energy efficiency and building decarbonization in low-income and environmental justice communities. Please see her full bio on the left of the screen. And with that, I will turn it over to Carmelita.
Thank you, Jen. And good morning and afternoon to everyone. Again, my name is Carmelita Miller. I use the pronouns she and her. I am the Energy Equity Director at the Greenlining Institute. Greenlining is a racial equity organization based in Oakland, California, whose work in energy, climate, banking, technology, health, and leadership development has been focused on advancing economic opportunities for historically redlined communities. Greenlining is the antidote to redlining. Do we still need an antidote for redlining if this policy has been made illegal decades ago? Look at these maps and you tell me. Let's take East Oakland as an example. The map to your very left was a map of redlined Berkeley and Oakland. The places in red are the neighborhoods where Black and brown people lived, people that banks and the government deemed too hazardous and too risky to lend to, due only to the color of their skin. You'll see East Oakland, I'm not sure how well you can see this, but towards there in the bottom, you'll see East Oakland at the bottom in red. The map in the middle is a contemporary map that highlights Oakland as well. East Oakland are the areas in the deep red areas. But this time, we're using the CalEnviro screen. The CalEnviro screen is a screening tool that identifies by census tract California communities that are disproportionately burdened by and vulnerable to multiple sources of pollution. The last map to the right is a screenshot of the interactive map created by the Alameda County Public Health Department that shows the most coronavirus cases by zip code. This is the map of the entire county, so this is zoomed out. But you'll see on the top is where Oakland is. And you'll find that East Oakland has the most cases of COVID. It's also in that deep red, all the way to the top. While I used Oakland as an example today, you will find that the impacts that these maps are showing are true all over California. The frontline communities where Black and brown Californians live are burdened by the cumulative impacts of the housing crisis, climate change, pollution, and now a pandemic. I took these graphs from the California Budget Center just to provide a visual for what I'm talking about. Before COVID-19, the pandemic started, our system was already broken. The racial wealth gap persists, displacement and gentrification were destroying our communities. The climate disasters were already a predictable part of our life. And as all of this is not enough, as I speak this morning, my fellow Californians and I are in the middle of an intense heat wave, which has caused us to be on the 5th or 6th day of rolling blackouts. And today, we are actually facing around 30 wildfires just in Northern California alone, where I'm currently at. Why does all of this matter? This panel is meant to talk about the necessary changes to the energy industry. But the messages that the speakers will talk to you about today will fall flat if we all do not establish an understanding that our current economic system that includes energy is built on the doctrine of maximizing profit and concentrating power. Racial injustice has been a part of our industry's DNA. Under our existing economic paradigm, the energy industry has used tools of extraction, productivity, exclusion, and segregation to uphold a system of white supremacy and income inequality. What Greenlining proposes is an energy economy where racial justice is a given, and the system has structures built into it to undo the root causes of inequity. What would it look like to use clean energy solutions to advance anti-racist policies? I and the speakers of this panel would like to start this conversation today. And with that, I'm turning it over to Rosa, who will talk about the importance of inclusion and representation of impacted communities through a deeper stakeholder engagement process.
Thanks, Carmelita. I'm going to introduce Rosa just really briefly. Rosa Gonzalez is dedicated to a thriving culture of participation where communities come together to solve social, environmental, and economic challenges. Through her project, Facilitating Power, she works with organizations, foundations, and collaborative initiatives to build the capacity for culture-rooted, community-driven leadership to advance whole system solutions. Please see her full bio on the left of the screen. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rosa.
Thank you so much. The paper that I'll be presenting from today is called Designing Equity-Focused Stakeholder Engagement to Inform Programs and Policies. And I co-wrote that with Maddie Kohler, Sandy Fazeli, and Casey Powers from NACIO, the National Association of State Energy Officials, as well as Michelle Grancy from the Minnesota Department of Commerce Energy Division. And the paper presents a number of tools that state energy officials can use in the design of their stakeholder engagement efforts. And it focused primarily on a tool that I developed called the Spectrum of Community Engagement to Ownership, which can be used in conjunction with other tools because it provides a framework and a shared language for understanding the various levels of stakeholder engagement and the impact that those different levels of engagement has on communities. And so for the purposes of this panel, I'll use the spectrum of community engagement to ownership to do just that. One of the reasons communities, as opposed to simply individuals with positional power, are best suited to inform and lead on the solutions needed to address our most pressing problems are because communities live at the intersection of multiple issues and therefore are more equipped to see the ways in which the problems are connected and to develop more integrated whole system solutions. Most of our current systems, on the other hand, tend to operate in silos, although there are folks working to break down existing silos. But within silos, there's often a generation of disconnected solutions that don't often address the root causes of the problems. And siloed systems also tend to think of community engagement more as a task in a list of things to do, as opposed to a core strategy for getting to real solutions. The spectrum of community engagement to ownership is designed to address that. And it's based on two existing tools, very common within the field of public planning. One is Arnstein's Ladder of Citizen Participation, which was actually developed in 1969. And then the Public Participation Spectrum developed by the International Association of Public Participation. And the spectrum of community engagement to ownership also draws on insights and expertise gathered from grassroots movements for environmental justice. It's based on a 6-point scale from 0 to 5, or from marginalization to community ownership. And at each phase along the spectrum, the impact of each level of engagement is indicated, as well as community engagement goals and sample activities. Marginalization, of course, is non-engagement, but it's critical that we acknowledge structural marginalization as the default of our current system unless conscious efforts are made to engage impacted communities. And then community ownership is also sort of beyond engagement, as it represents the merging of community and governance. It's really critical that community ownership anchor the end of the spectrum to be clear that equity will be achieved when communities of color have a direct say over the resources we need to live. Each of the phases of engagement along the way can help to unlock community power and capacity needed for equitable solutions to take hold, as long as we don't get stuck in any one phase along the way. This tool can be used for assessing projects, programs, and campaigns, and there are instructions included for how to conduct collaborative assessments of engagement efforts with stakeholders. And those activities are designed to set shared goals for strengthening community engagement. It can also be used to help develop plans for policies and programs. And it includes an overview of what community engagement might look like at each phase of the policy development process, and can serve as a guide for democratizing the policy development process through partnership with community-based organizations. Essentially, the spectrum charts a pathway for strengthening our state and local democracies so that we can activate the capacities needed for real solutions to the big challenges we're currently facing. So let's take a quick look at each level of engagement. All around us, we're seeing the impacts of structural marginalization, which as both Jen and Carmelita spoke to, we know is rooted in a legacy of genocide against Indigenous people, colonial systems of extraction, and the invention of race and racism to justify chattel slavery for so many generations. Systematic exclusion and violence against people of color has been ingrained into our systems. So much so that even after slavery was abolished, white supremacy was maintained through other forms of institutionalized racism that locked Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples out of financial and educational opportunity and political power. And of course, movements for social justice have helped us break out of those patterns and make some progress, but we're still experiencing actively the impacts of environmental racism, redlining, racialized over-policing, voter suppression, and racialized exploitation of workers, all of which rely on and reinforce structural marginalization. And so unless we're actively working together to break down existing barriers to participation by impacted communities, our systems will default to what adds up to denying people access to decision-making processes that impact them. A healthy flow of information within impacted communities is foundational to participation. As the saying goes, knowledge is power. An increased information flow can help to demystify decision-making processes. A really important action that state energy officials and offices can take, for example, is to focus on making policy and planning processes as transparent as possible for impacted communities and to clarify the points along the process where communities can have a voice. Often, however, information campaigns are focused more on personal responsibility and do things like offer residents tips for improving energy efficiencies. And there's, of course, nothing wrong with energy efficiency tips and information. But when information flow stays at this one-directional level, from the organization or agency to residents with no opportunity for residents to inform policies and programs that impact them, it essentially cuts off community voice and can serve to placate communities. Which brings us to the second level along the spectrum. Consulting communities creates an opportunity for two-way information flow and theoretically gives community members a voice or some level of input into policies and programs. But there are a number of pitfalls at this level of engagement to be aware of. Often community members are asked to provide inputs into already almost fully baked plans, and consultation activities can feel more like an exercise in rubber stamping. Another pitfall is not having a feedback loop to inform communities as to how their contributions and inputs were used. And sometimes community groups never hear back from agencies that have consulted with them, and that can compromise trust. And lastly, if community members who are consulted are not part of an organized effort, it's difficult for them to represent the needs and visions of their communities. I recommend agencies avoid consultation activities that engage individuals instead of working with community organizing groups that have done that work with residents to develop an analysis of the problem and to identify real solutions that actually meet community needs and strengths. And so what all of these pitfalls can add up to is tokenization, or giving someone a seat without any real power behind that seat. And just like greenlining is the antidote to redlining, the antidote to tokenization is community organizing. Authentic community involvement in the decision-making that impacts communities is made possible by community organizing groups who are focused on building community power through shared vision, alliance building, coordinated advocacy, and solutions development. And so if we're truly dedicated to equity and equitable planning and equity and energy efficiency, then we need to work together to ensure that community organizing groups are resourced to do this essential work of a healthy democracy. Agencies can work with base building groups to conduct open planning processes, to ensure community participation needs are met, and to do things like establish community advisory boards. This level of involvement can lay the groundwork for deeper collaboration between government and communities, which is especially needed to create the kind of infrastructure that's needed to achieve full energy efficiency and equity. And finally, it's important that energy offices and organizations, agencies be informed by groups leading full community-driven efforts for energy efficiency and energy justice, and as much as possible move resources in this direction. When communities come together and fully design their own solutions, they get at the root causes of the inequities they experience through more holistic, comprehensive solutions that move us towards true energy democracy through community-driven projects and cooperatives, which are a vital piece of our energy future. And it's going to take all of us to get there. So just wanted to end with this quote from Denise Fairchild from Emerald Cities. She advises us, be multidimensional. No one organization, no one sector of the economy, no one initiative will turn the tide. It took all the muscle, social, political, legal, and financial of the domestic and international community to abolish slavery, as it will to build a just net zero economy. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Rosa. That was amazing, and definitely 3 million snaps to resourcing community organizers and organizations that have community organizing capacity. I'd love to turn it over next to Liz Kelly. And Liz Kelly, Dr. Elizabeth Kelly, is an anthropologist with nearly 15 years of experience conducting ethnographic and qualitative research. Her formal training in linguistic and cultural anthropology helps her identify drivers and barriers to participation and how energy fits into everyday life on the human side of the meter. You can see Liz's full bio on the left of the screen. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Liz.
Hi, okay. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak on the panel and for that introduction, Chandra. It's an honor to be here with you all today and with Rosa and Carmelita and Sarah, and to be able to present. So I'll be presenting a paper that my colleague Alex Dunn and I wrote together. And can you see and hear me okay? So the paper that we wrote is called "A Rose is Not a Rose by Any Other Name, Why Language and Context Matters." And Alex and I are both trained in linguistics and now work at Loom Advising, which is a research and evaluation consultancy. And so in this paper and in our work, we bring our lens as linguists to the world of energy efficiency. As Rosa just highlighted, there's a big spectrum in terms of effective and inclusive communication and outreach. And a lot of the examples I'll be sharing are toward that sort of earlier part of the spectrum. And I'll try and highlight some ways and instances where there's an opportunity to create more inclusive language. Let me move the slide. So this is an overview of the paper and the topics that we cover in the paper. I won't be talking about all of them today, but on this panel, we're talking about equity. And Alex and I think that language is really central to these conversations. So we're coming at this from a more academic lens, but throughout today's discussion, I'll highlight moments where there's an opportunity to take a critical eye at how marketing and outreach materials do or don't take into account underserved communities or the voices of various communities. And we're trying to highlight these things to be aware of or thoughtful of, perhaps in those moments on, if we use sort of the spectrum that Rosa just presented sort of before that ownership to move towards there. And we believe that there are things as an industry that we can do to work to move us toward those more inclusive communications. So one thing that we talk about in the paper is cognitive frames and framing. And frames and other similar heuristics can serve as a shortcut to understand a given situation. And they're helpful for navigating the world. So if I walk into a grocery store, even if it's an unfamiliar store, I can usually pretty quickly figure out where it is that I am going to find the things that I need, because a lot of grocery stores in the US anyway are organized in a similar way. So I have a frame, and it's helpful for navigating the world. But it can also, unfortunately, these frames can also reinforce harmful and pejorative stereotypes. So I have a picture of Joe Biden on the slide here, not because of the Democratic National Convention happening this week, so strange accident of timing, but because of a gaffe that he made last summer. So due to historical and structural histories of racism and discrimination and the perpetuation of white supremacist systems of power, there's a substantial disparity in wealth between Black communities and white communities, as Carmelita and Rosa have both discussed. So this may lead to a heuristic that links white with wealthy and brown or Black with poor. And so in summer 2019, Democratic presidential candidate and former Vice President Joe Biden made such a gaffe when he said that, quote, poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. And he later corrected himself to explain that he did not mean to suggest that white is the opposite of poor, but such a slip in his speech reflects a frame linking Black and brown communities, Black and brown kids and people of color to poverty. And why does this matter? So why does this matter in a utility context? Well, in a utility context, sometimes well-intentioned actions, for instance, ensuring that links to bill assistance or income qualified programs are prominently featured on the Spanish language homepage of a utility website, may in fact reinforce such frames. This placement may perpetuate stereotypes about race and class and suggest that individuals who speak Spanish are more likely to be looking for bill assistance. And I use this example because Illum did a benchmarking review of utility websites in languages other than English. And in that review, what we found is that several Spanish language versions of utility websites, so not the Google translated versions, but ones where it was actually a website built in Spanish, included very prominent links to bill assistance and low-income programs. Now, this was a benchmarking review. We weren't involved in it, so it is totally possible that providing that information so prominently was the result of good user experience design based on research suggesting that within a given service territory, people who are looking reading the website in Spanish are more likely to be looking for information about bill assistance or low-income programs. However, what we noted is that those websites were not as likely to include prominent links to other means to lower home energy bills, such as information about solar or other renewable programs or energy efficiency programs or information about community solar. Or anything really other than bill assistance compared with the English language versions, where on the ways to save or similar links, there were much more prominent images or links to information about community solar or renewable programs or energy efficiency programs. So the nuance here that we try to tease out in the paper is around the balance of providing good and relevant information, especially in a context where structural discrimination may mean that individuals who are searching in Spanish may also be more likely to be looking for bill assistance without reinforcing stereotypes about a group of individuals or foreclosing access and making it more difficult potentially to access programs other than this sort of one limited bill assistance. And so in offering assistance or easy links to bill assistance while not highlighting other ways of reducing energy costs may inadvertently perpetuate these frames around and stereotypes and exclude some communities from accessing other modes of lowering their bills. So in this slide, we recommend assessing which frames are relevant when creating communication and suggest that practitioners be aware of the assumptions that they may be bringing to bear on the work that we're doing, and consciously assess whether these assumptions are valid and useful. And thinking about sort of general market messaging. Within a general population, there's often this default of white, male, straight, Christian, educated, often classed upper middle class as a default. And these are kind of unmarked categories that need no explanation or modification. So again, to use a politics example, we don't say Joe Biden, the white male presidential candidate, but we do note that Kamala Harris is a Black woman vice presidential candidate. And the point here is that in the context of general market outreach or communications, or thinking about how we communicate about energy, that default category is not descriptive of a general population, which is vastly more diverse than this, like what becomes this unmarked category of white, male, Christian, straight default. And so we think that it is imperative to incorporate a diversity of perspectives and outreach, not only in specific outreach that may be tailored to communities that have been historically underserved, but actually across all points of contact between a utility and their customers. And I am thinking of a utility context, but it could be a state energy office, it could be various other other groups that may be messaging to a broad population, where communicating not only to sort of a default generic, but actually to specific communities is a valuable part of that. I'm going to shift now, because the paper does focus a lot on translation, to talk a bit about translation specifically. And I just spoke about translation, the Spanish language version of a website, and what was offered on built Spanish language websites that were created in Spanish. But there was a lot of utility websites that we looked at in this benchmarking review that were just Google translated, sort of, you choose your language, Google, and it translates things. And we noted that not all the content was translated because it was using only the machine translation. So what happened was that videos, graphics, embedded content was not translated, and that was English only. So this kind of half translation did offer access in that other language, but it was an inferior experience for people looking at the website, for whom, was sort of not everything was there, not everything was available or accessible. And in the context of equity and inclusion, this kind of halfway translation can really emphasize and create a user experience where the person who's looking at the website or accessing a website in a different language is reminded that that other language is really secondary or an afterthought. And we saw this in other aspects. We talk about this in other elements of program delivery in the context specifically of utility energy efficiency programs. And this incomplete experience, incomplete translation can happen outside an online experience. So on this slide, I have an example of a program that offered this initial access without a complete journey. So when providing translations or marketing in other languages, one of the things that can happen is that it's initial access. There's an initial flyer or a sign up or an application that's been translated, but isn't followed through. So again, in this slide, there was initial outreach, but when the team intervened on behalf of non-English speakers, we were told that non-English speaker would need to have an interpreter with them during the phone call and during the audit. And so this is from Nicole Morris McLaughlin in testimony to the Massachusetts Energy Efficiency Advisory Council. So in this case, although outreach materials were available in multiple languages, and there were some individuals available to support in languages other than English, at a critical moment in service delivery, the in-home audit, individuals would need to provide their own interpreter, as the program did not have the contractors or energy auditors who spoke languages other than English, nor did they provide interpretation. So this was not adequate to allow participation from individuals with limited English proficiency. And in addition to this being a disincentive to participation, we also know that when people provide their own interpreter, it's often a child, whether either a grown child or a child still under 18, and thinking about the complexity of an audit and communicating about energy efficiency or energy terms, insulation and things like that, as well as if you have, for instance, something that we've heard, if you have someone, who's taking care of mail and bills and health and doctors things for their parent, where does something about their energy fit within that sort of triaging that they might be doing? So being thoughtful about the assumptions we bring to marketing, I am at my time, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thoughtful about frames and assumptions we bring to marketing and outreach. And when providing translations, thinking beyond, it's not only about translation, thinking about the language that we use, that even energy efficiency is not actually is a jargony term that we often feel comfortable with, but isn't used, as easily. So I am going to wrap it up now. And as evaluators, researchers, and others who are talking about energy efficiency every day, we may be comfortable with this, but meeting people where they are and creating inclusive language and concepts is imperative. Thank you all so much. And I am going to pass it over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz. I'm going to quickly introduce my friend, Sarah Hill. Very excited to introduce Sarah, who is the Director of Low-Income Programs for AEA's West Coast office. Sarah's dedicated to making improvements in the built environment that result in healthy, affordable, resilient, and efficient homes for disadvantaged communities, all while achieving deep reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm going to take it away, Sarah.
Thank you, Chandra. Hi, all. First, I wanted to thank ACEEE for gathering us today and this week in general. It's been such an important conversation, so I'm really honored to contribute. I also wanted to thank my co-authors, Nick Durr and Tab Harrison, for their contributions to this work. Today, I'm going to talk about why equitable electrification matters and present effective program models that can help achieve it. We know that there are myriad technical, financial, and programmatic challenges, and also opportunities associated with electrifying existing low-income multifamily buildings. Designing programs that prepare low-income communities for participation in our clean energy future is a critical component of equitable long-term decarbonization strategies. And while we don't have time today to dive into the full content of this paper, the session is going to discuss some effective approaches to those challenges and offer up opportunities to seize those opportunities using California's Low-Income Weatherization Program, or LIWIP, as a case study. California has been pushing towards an increasingly proactive low-carbon future, and it's ambitious and also exciting. But building electrification is one of the most viable pathways that our industry has to immediate and scalable climate change impact. And it will bring additional co-benefits to our communities as well. Electrifying will improve health and safety by eliminating gas lines and combustion gases from conditioned spaces, which will in turn improve both our indoor and outdoor air quality. It provides a pathway to zero emissions buildings through carbon-free renewable energy. It provides pathways to increase energy efficiency through heat pump technology, which in turn can bring resiliency by providing both heating and cooling to climate vulnerable communities that are facing a steady increase in cooling degree days due to global warming. And it also provides a pathway to reducing energy costs. In combination, energy efficiency, electrification, and solar PV has the potential to significantly reduce or eliminate energy burdens for low-income renters. And this is important because the price of natural gas is trending upwards, and the cost for what used to be considered an affordable fuel is projected to increase dramatically in the coming years, leaving residents of gas-intensive buildings, now stranded assets, to foot the bill. So while building electrification offers myriad opportunities to invest in long-term infrastructure upgrades that can significantly reduce pollution and energy burden in frontline communities, the challenges related to multifamily split incentives, and solar benefits can create barriers to adoption in communities that arguably need it the most. Low-income multifamily buildings have been a challenging market to penetrate historically. As a result, multifamily renters have been largely underserved by energy efficiency programs. This burden is particularly disempowering for low-income renters who may lack not only the capital, but also the right to upgrade their residences to significantly reduce their energy consumption costs. An inherent conflict arises in multifamily rental properties when the landlord owns the equipment, but the resident pays for its operation, creating a split incentive. Affordable housing property owners have complicated debt stacks, limited bandwidth, and funding to pursue energy upgrades in general. But when the return on investment is distributed to the residents, it makes pursuing substantial resident benefiting energy upgrades economically unviable. Electrifying existing buildings is also significantly more complicated and costly than electrifying new construction. Without effective programs to assist communities through this transition with technical and financial support, there's a real and significant threat that low-income communities will continue to be disproportionately burdened by the rising cost and health impacts of natural gas. So, on to solutions that can help get us there. The Low-Income Weatherization Program for Multifamily Properties, or LIWIP, was launched in January of 2016 as a part of the California Climate Investments, a statewide initiative that puts cap-and-trade dollars to work reducing greenhouse gas emissions with particular focus on disadvantaged low-income communities. To date, LIWIP has been allocated $63.9 million to continue to serve low-income properties in disadvantaged communities through 2022. Administered by the California Department of Community Services and Development, or CSD, and implemented by the Association for Energy Affordability, the program model was intentionally designed with an understanding of barriers to enrollment and impact for both affordable property owners and low-income residents. Moving into its fourth year of implementation, the program has shown wide-scale success incentivizing deep energy retrofits, electrification, and solar PV installations for this hard-to-reach market segment. Tailored to meet the needs of the communities that it serves while remaining flexible and attractive to the affordable property owners, the program brings energy and non-energy benefits to disadvantaged communities to help prepare for the challenges of climate change and participate in the health and economic benefits of California's clean energy future. This program shows some of the program's impact to date. So I'm going to outline some of the program elements of LIWIP multifamily that were really designed to overcome the barriers to access for the communities that we serve. While each of these elements provide value on their own, the proven success of this model is the way in which these elements work together. In combination, these program elements provide a viable pathway to encourage high-impact retrofits in California's frontline communities. At its foundation, LIWIP was designed as a comprehensive whole building program. The whole building framework is supported by a simple, flexible incentive methodology. In other words, any measure identified that can save energy is eligible for incentives. This is critical because as existing buildings are complicated and varied, so similarly, the approach to whole building energy savings interventions should be flexible enough to provide customized upgrade recommendations. By keeping eligible measures flexible, it allows the program to optimize its team of technical analysts to provide customized recommendations for holistic energy savings that are specific to and able to most efficiently address a property's energy profile to ensure that the property maximizes efficiency and health outcomes. This in turn has allowed the program to achieve demonstrated results. Properties enrolling in LIWIP are averaging 37% site energy savings from energy efficiency measures alone, and 43% site energy savings when energy efficiency and solar PV are pursued in tandem. Furthermore, as highlighted in this pie chart, more than 1/3 of the projects completed to date are projected to save more than 45% energy savings overall. including 3 that are projected to reach near net zero. LIWIP is also the first program in California to combine energy efficiency and renewable energy under a single program model. And providing access to both allows property owners to consider the holistic impact of energy efficiency combined with solar PV when evaluating the scope and long-term return on investment. This evaluation is particularly important as property owners assess the feasibility of electrification. When the program by design evaluates the interaction between energy efficiency upgrades, electrification, and solar PV, it provides property owners with more information to consider upfront, to consider that an integrated approach for deep energy savings. Program results confirm the effectiveness of this formula. To date, 41% of completed projects have integrated some form of fuel switching into their work scope, and half of these projects incorporated solar PV as well. Carmelita touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to include some of the program's eligibility criteria in this discussion as well, because designing intentional eligibility criteria encourages enrollment from diverse instances of multifamily housing across the state, while also targeting the most vulnerable and underserved populations. So how do we do that? We use the same tool that Carmelita had talked about, the Cal Enviro screen, developed by the California Environmental Protections Agency and the California Office of Environmental and Health Hazards Assessment, to map multiple stressors and pollutants in California communities. While subsidized affordable housing ensures both permanence and regulation for affordable communities, we also know that 1/4 of the 3.3 million low-income households in California live in subsidized affordable housing or receive vouchers. Therefore, another element worth mentioning briefly here is including naturally occurring affordable properties in the program eligibility criteria. This inclusion is crucial in order to serve the remaining 3/4 of the low-income households throughout the state. Split incentives are arguably one of the most important and challenging obstacles to overcome when designing multifamily efficiency and renewable energy programs. LIWIP developed an innovative tiered incentive model that was aimed at overcoming the split incentive hurdle to maximize resident benefiting investments. As part of the California Climate Investments Program, our main purpose is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So LIWIP's energy efficiency incentive rate is determined by the metric tons of CO2 reduced by energy efficiency measures at the property. The tiered incentive model, as outlined on this slide, allows the program to contribute a higher incentive rate for installed measures that impact the utility bills of low-income residents, and a slightly lower rate for those that impact the utility bills of the owner. By significantly increasing the funding for resident benefiting upgrades, the program offsets the out-of-pocket investment for property owners to make substantial upgrades within the units and to the building envelope. In addition to lowering the resident energy burden, these investments allow property owners to tackle deferred maintenance, replace inefficient systems that are nearing the end of their useful life with high efficiency upgrades. And as a result, the program is able to encourage deeper investments that bring direct benefits to residents. The graph on this slide illustrates that the program has contributed approximately half of its incentives, energy savings, and greenhouse gas reductions to benefit residents directly. Managing the process of deep energy retrofits and navigating the complexities of various incentive programs is a challenge, and affordable property owners' time and knowledge can be a significant barrier to access. To mitigate this barrier, LIWIP offers no-cost technical assistance throughout the lifecycle of the project, which allows the technical analysts to give the property owners the type of knowledge and experience that they need. One of these critical aspects of technical assistance is providing participants with experienced, objective, single points of contact that have years of experience with not only multifamily building audits, but also electrifying existing buildings. This level of support is crucial as property owners become pioneers in the existing building decarbonization. I also briefly want to mention the program is really designed to work in tandem with some complementary programs, which has been a really crucial pathway for success for Lywood multifamily, as it helps overcome one of the main burdens for affordable properties to engage in really deep energy retrofits, which is financial resource constraints. So really making sure that the technical analysts are aware of the landscape for the other programs that are out there, and designing it so that they can layer and stack those resources so that the out-of-pocket costs are minimized, helps encourage more. I'm going to work to wrap this up because I know we're running a little bit over, but I did want to talk about benchmarking, which is one of our premier programmatic commitments for this program that's really helped not only inform our decision-making after the projects, but allows us to provide ongoing technical assistance to ensure that investments are made and maintained for the energy savings that they've invested in. I wanted to show this slide in particular is an example of benchmarking data for residential meters in a 36-unit property in Wasco, California. This property, which houses predominantly low-income families, demonstrates the importance of reviewing pre- and post-construction utility bills. The property had replaced non-condensing gas domestic hot water and space heating systems with inverter-driven heat pumps. And it also included a 110 kilowatt solar PV system, 93% of which directly offsets the resident use. As a result, the residential in-unit energy was reduced 44%. And that was from the energy efficiency upgrades alone. The utility costs decreased by 18% from energy efficiency alone. And that is before the PV is included. So once the PV is included, the residents are projected to save $30,000 annually on their combined energy bills, saving an estimated $830 per household per year. Okay, I'm gonna jump and wrap this up. As the climate continues to change, the need to address disparities in energy burden, comfort, health, and resilience in frontline communities becomes increasingly urgent. Low-income communities will face a disproportionate burden of the burgeoning clean energy future if we do not continue to invest resources to level the playing field. In order to penetrate the low-income multifamily sector, program models that break traditional silos of ownership and fuel type need to be explored. California's low-income weatherization program for multifamily properties has proven to be an effective model for targeted deep energy retrofits, bringing the benefits of electrification to historically disadvantaged communities. Continued funding for impactful program models is a critical element it is critical to invest in low-income communities to build the infrastructure that will prepare frontline communities to participate in our clean energy future. The actions taken today can either help to mitigate or can significantly increase the wealth and health disparity of the next decade of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. We've introduced Carmelita. So Carmelita, we're gonna turn it over to you to talk about democratic processes and solutions.
Absolutely. And because I'm looking at the time, it looks like we have about 8 minutes. I'm actually just going to jump in. Folks can see our framework that we actually co-developed with the Energy Efficiency for All Coalition in California, which Sarah and AA are part of. I have the 5-step process here, but again, because we're out of time, I really want to use the remaining time that I do have, even through fast forwarding through this, to highlight our case study that we highlighted in the framework, which is the San Joaquin Valley Affordable Energy Pilots. We do see that the values that Rosa had talked about earlier, and of course the framework steps that we have in our published report, that it's doable. We've seen it happen, and we've seen it happen and done in frontline communities and the most disadvantaged communities in California. And this happened in the California Public Utility Commission's San Joaquin Valley Affordable Energy Pilots, which is a perfect example of successful, not perfect, let's say less than perfect example of community-driven decarbonization policymaking that follows the framework steps. So in California, the California legislature directed the California Public Utilities Commission to provide access to clean and affordable energy to the residents of the San Joaquin Valley, who have long been redlined from gas. These are residents who are currently using wood or propane in their households. In the proceeding that opened up, the community advocates who have been working with the residents for decades to identify solutions that would work best for them also worked with the assigned commissioner who championed the values of environmental justice and equitable policies. The Commissioner Marta Guzman-Aceves co-hosted community workshops and ordered the parties in this proceeding, including the utility providers, so they forced them to attend these workshops all over the San Joaquin Valley and interact face-to-face with the residents who shared their stories, talked about their needs, and even got to voice the kind of energy service that they want for their families. They got to also learn about the different kinds of clean energy services that could be extended to them. And each of the workshops at the end allowed some form of the residents voting whether they want a gas extension or they want other clean energy services for their homes. Again, I'm fast forwarding a lot here, not only because of our time for this panel, because also truly the pilots were a result of a 3-year proceeding. But this battle for clean energy access in the San Joaquin Valley has been going on since, even before I was born. The San Joaquin Valley pilot put community needs at the center stage. It offers at least 11 host communities. I think there's about 12 pilots. But at least 11 of them offers a variety of ways to move away from fossil fuels for heating and cooking to electric appliances powered by clean energy. And on this slide, I've given a shout out to the pilot team, the local organizations that really helped in the proceeding, Self-Help Enterprises, Center for Race, Poverty, and the Environment, and the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountabilities. Environmental justice and equity organizations like Greenlining have found building electrification policies can be transformative. It can be a transformative force for impacted residents, but only done through intentional policymaking. And we propose the 5 steps that we have in this framework to do that. The framework will help guarantee that the building electrification revolution is a transformative force that puts our communities, like in the San Joaquin Valley, where again, the original goal was to extend gas. And now we're seeing that the pilots are actually instead providing building electrification for communities that would not have been able to access this otherwise. And I'll end there so that we have some more time to discuss this as a panel.
Thanks so much, Carmelita, and thanks so much to all of these, our wonderful presenters and these presentations. We got a lot of questions, so we're going to dive right in and going to start with you, Rosa. A few questions came in through your presentation. So we're going to start with one comment that says, it seems like many of the higher number activities on the spectrum would require more resources and funding. How can low-income communities realistically fund this work?
That is the question that I hope we are all focused on answering together and really collaborating to move resources in the direction of grassroots groups that are rooted in frontline communities most impacted by energy burdens and many of the other inequities that intersect with energy burdens. This is a powerful moment for us to really get clear on our priorities as a society, cultivate deep, authentic partnerships with our philanthropic partners, and also work with local and state government to reprioritize where resourcing goes there are a lot of there is a number of dollars, a significant amount of dollars go to larger intermediary agencies to help with community engagement, when really that work can be done most effectively by grassroots groups. And there are other sources of money that if we reprioritize where our public dollars go, we could ensure that communities are resourced to do the urgent work of today.
Absolutely. I think you made a great point about understanding this moment that we're in and reprioritizing, resources when we're having these conversations. And in follow up to that, what are some ways to ensure that we're not placing the burden of work to most burdened communities?
That's a great question. And it's one of the reasons why the collaboration phase along the spectrum is really powerful and important, although there are pitfalls there as well. One potential pitfall is when the expectation is that if community groups are in collaboration with government or other sectors, that they wouldn't also push back on government and on other sectors when they are doing things, whether inadvertently or directly, that may be harmful to communities. And so that's the one pitfall we need to avoid with collaboration, is to ensure that that doesn't sort of cut off community power building and the ability of communities to push back when harm is being caused. But taking a collaborative approach where different sectors and entities recognize the unique role that we each have to play in moving towards, in this case, energy efficiency and equity, then we can, instead of focusing so much on moving our individual agendas, focus instead on how do we play our unique role in healthy relationship to all the other players in the system, and especially to impacted communities. That can really help to share the burden of the work needed to get to a just energy future.
Chandra, do we have more time for me to add to what Rosa has said about?
Please, Carmelita.
Yeah, so in California, at least in my experience, and we work a lot as part of our coalition with community-based organizations that are already contracted to go out in our communities to provide marketing, education, and outreach, and to also install energy efficiency solar, right? So like our community members are already there. What we have found, at least in the time, even in the short time I've been at Greenlining, we've found that the support for these community-based organizations have actually diminished. And this is through many, many reasons I can discuss one-on-one with other folks who are interested. But there are already ways that we have found in the past to actually include our community members, empower them economically, right? Get them the contracts, get them to become part of these bigger contracts that are right now really just benefiting non-diverse businesses. What I'm saying is that they're out there. We are out there. We have businesses. We have small businesses ourselves, and we're part of the communities. And we can find ways to really do that. And in the San Joaquin Valley, although I don't know much about the current impact, what's happened is that the state had created what's called the Community Energy Navigators. And again, the point there is to put the responsibility back to the community members, the community-based organizations, but also get them paid. Right, get them paid so that they continue to do the work. They're already the trusted members of the community, and they're doing an amazing job. So, just my quick pitch for it's, there are ways to get it done. We shouldn't say that it's impossible. It actually just takes a commitment to direct the funding towards these organizations.
Thanks so much, Carmelita. And kind of lifting up, I think, some of the pieces that you were speaking to, and I think we're short on time to talk about in detail. is, some of the work that's happening in the San Joaquin Valley and, the work that's happening as a part of electrification efforts there. I'm wondering if you want to start, and then we can move it over to Sarah. Just talking a little bit more about like what you are seeing and what is needed, to kind of really create this shift when it comes to energy efficiency and equity, and how do we build that trust in communities. And for Sarah, just kind of lifting up LIWIP and the electrification efforts in LIWIP. Can you speak a little bit more to that and how the LIWIP program is benefiting low-income residents? So Carmelita, if you want to start, and then we can move it over to Sarah.
Great. So one major shift that I know we all have to do is the belief that we, the people of our communities, are experts too. I think that the idea that community-based organizations, activists, and advocates on the ground can't learn enough about energy efficiency or building electrification or decarbonization so that we can actually become part of the decision-making process is so flawed, and we need to stop it, right? The fact that I'm even here talking about the San Joaquin Valley pilots and not a San Joaquin Valley resident involved in the pilots is already kind of, it makes me feel a lot of things, right? It really should be our community members who are here telling their stories. But the case is that they're not, and it's because we've had such a long time of just disempowering our community members. If there is a shift right now, if I can wave a magic wand and say, I want to change this, I'm going to change the perception that a lot of bigger advocates, environmental advocates, and technical folks that I know are in the audience today, if I can just change your mind and get you to believe that we, the people in our communities, we know what we want. We know our lived experiences. We're the experts of that. We can actually, work with you and figure out a solution that would work for our families. Because at the end of the day, we might have aligned goals, right? And we can get up to the technical knowledge that's needed. We've seen that happen in the San Joaquin Valley pilots. If we just took the time, if we just took the opportunity to invest more energy, more funding, so that we can explain to our residents, to our families, what is building decarbonization? What is building electrification? What kind of benefits would that give you? What other needs do you have at your home? Maybe we have a program about that. Those kinds of conversations aren't really happening because we're in a room all on our own, deciding for our communities about what's best for them, and ignoring the repeated calls for self-determination, which is really where the future of our communities are at.
Thanks, Carmelita. Sarah, do you want to speak a little bit on electrification and benefits to low-income residents and limited wealth communities?
Sure. I think the importance of these program models are designing mechanisms to create an opportunity where everybody has an equal access to some of the clean energy future that we're moving towards, and what these programs can do when they're designed specifically for communities that they're intended to serve is address barriers to access that other programs just haven't been able to do in the past. And so part of the call to action, I think, around considerations for program models across the country, I hope. I mean, I know this is rooted here in the state of California, and this has been the proving ground for this model to be successful for low-income communities in the state. the program elements can really be applied to any jurisdiction in any state across the nation. These practices can be replicated, and it's replicable and scalable, and none of this is proprietary. And so I think a large part, our hope here is that people will hear that this is doable, and that these are some strategies to overcome the barriers that we know exist in these hard to reach communities, so that we can start to invest proactively in the infrastructure that can help reduce future bills that can sort of increase the wealth and health disparities that we know already exist. And so to really get proactive about the ways in which we're investing in our communities, so that we're setting them up for success in the future, giving them sort of a way in which to participate in our clean energy future.
I think that's a great point, Sarah, something that you mentioned, just talking about being proactive and then speaking to the barriers that we talk about when we classify communities as hard to reach. Liz, one of the questions that we received speaks to this a little bit. And the question was, straight translation always doesn't account for plain language or cultural context. Messaging created in English may fall flat and not create desired outcomes when simply translated to another language. Can you speak to the importance of leading with culture and context instead of just language?
Sure. Thank you so much for that. I think that's such a great question and such a great point. Absolutely. So one of the things we do talk about in the paper that I didn't bring forward here was really that the limits of translation. So something, even if it's accurate grammatically, an idiom may not mean the same thing. And so absolutely being culturally competent is critical for creating messaging that will resonate across multiple communities. And I think to Carmelita's point, just about bringing people, and Rosa's as well, but like bringing people in, so it's not necessarily a question of like, how do I talk to someone over there and like decipher what might work? It's actually like having that knowledge internal to an organization and internal to a group, so that it's not a question of, like speaking to an other, but actually having more, this is where, more diverse workforce creates opportunities to sort of like makes the problem kind of go away. But I am going to give up the floor in just a minute, but I did want to say that, yes, absolutely, cultural context, cultural competency. And when you don't have the diversity within your workforce yet, let's say, and you are trying to create messages to communicate with a community population that isn't necessarily your community, then I think if, involving people, asking people, doing testing within the community, and bringing, to Carmelita and Rosa's point, like bringing people in the community in to say, what are your needs and how could this, if there's a program, even in the program design phase or in program outreach, to understand, to communicate there. So I don't think, I think there's a lot that can be done at sort of every stage, but between marginalization and ownership in that framework. But thank you so much for the question and for the conversation, and just 100%, Carmelita, I appreciate what you said about, different voices and bringing voices of communities forward that aren't here.
Okay. We just got thanks so much, Liz. We just got a really great question in, and it reads as this: I can't help but notice that this panel is a great group of women, which is a unique and refreshing sight in the energy industry. Though it may also point to the fact that a lot of folks are not a part of this conversation. So this is for any of you who wants to answer. How do we bring this topic to the central discourse and ensure this is top of mind for the whole industry? Who wants to start?
I'll just quickly say it starts with all of us here, not just on the panel, but everyone engaging in this conversation, listening in, we all assuming that responsibility. We can center this conversation using all of our outlets, bringing it to our organizations, our agencies, and using the channels of communication that we have.
I'll also add that we need you all's help, right? I'm here because Jen invited me, and other folks had to make it happen. And in many other venues that I'm at, it's either a struggle for greenlining to, either become a formal party somewhere, and we're fortunate enough that we have the resources to even get there, and we're struggling to pass on those opportunities to our partners. But really, it's we need your all's help. Those who are listening to this webinar right now, invite the folks that we're talking about today. I've been name dropping for a reason, right? Invite them. Get us into the places that we normally you don't see us at. So if you have received an invitation somewhere and you look at the list of guests and you don't see us, someone has to say something and go ahead and invite us, and we'll try to make it happen. So it sometimes can be as simple as that. I sleep with my talking points. I'm ready to go. Invite me if I can make it, and and I'm free. I'll go there, and I'll talk to you about decarbonization, about energy efficiency. I can do it all day. But the first step is to even get an invite, and which is something that rarely gets to us at all.
So we did get the okay that we could go a couple of minutes over. And Carmelita, that is, I love that. I sleep with my talking points, and I think that is so critical. Even as we talk to each other, the same way that there's sort of been a movement to push back on mantles, right, and calling folks out on that. And I think it's so critical that women, and particularly Black women and women of color, are lifting up who we know, and who we talk to. So many things are about who you know, particularly in this industry. So the more that we can lift those names up, I think is a great point. Jen, do we have one more question or lead in we might want to choose for another minute before we head into the wrap up?
I think our final question could be, what are the steps we need to implement large-scale change? If folks want to give just a couple of thoughts on that.
I would say in the program space, we couldn't do any of this work without the ongoing advocacy of organizations like Greenlining and other people on this panel, and I'm sure many people in the audience who advocate for continued funding that is really directly contributing to investments in our disadvantaged communities here in California. So ongoing advocacy as well as community interaction.
On the evaluation side, I think something that's a step in the right direction is when there are evaluations, when there are stakeholders involved in program design development or community organizations involved in evaluation efforts, ensuring that they're involved in the recommendation process and the sort of next steps process, and that those evaluations aren't separated and happening in these silos.
I feel like California is already there, right? We've been talking about how to decarbonize the state and our economy, and that's a huge change. And of course, that comes with huge economic opportunities. And so in decarbonizing California, one major change, because we're at the beginning, is to undo the things that we did in the past clean energy policies and solar and energy efficiency. Let us start with equity. Take this opportunity that we're starting. It's a lot messy because we don't know yet how we're going to do this. But we do know one thing, and we know that we've left people behind in the past, and now is an opportunity to actually bring people in. And so don't miss this opportunity of starting something huge, and leave people again, actually do the things that the panelists on this webinar have been saying all along.
Really grateful to the perspectives of all the panelists, and just wanted to add that underscore that we're in a watershed moment right now. We're in a really powerful moment of transition. And the more we open ourselves up to that and take a good, honest look at what shifts do we need personally as individuals, what shifts are needed within our organizations, our agencies, our departments, and be willing to make those fundamental shifts that are needed to democratize the processes by which programs and policies are designed, and to strengthen relationships, even relationships within our teams, relationships across departments, like Carmelita said, breaking down those silos, and then authentic relationships between sectors, between philanthropy, between government and community-based grassroots organizations.
Amazing. I think that is a perfect way to wrap up. And to Carmelita and Rose's point, let's agree and commit right now. Our call to action as we end this session is to not miss this opportunity. Let's seize the moment to bring people in. Look around your own tables and ask ourselves who's missing, whose voice needs to be here. And let's make the strong pushes for these fundamental shifts. It is up to us. And this is definitely the kind of good trouble I am looking forward to getting into with everyone on this panel, in this session, and across this wonderful proceeding. So again, thanks so much to our presenters for their presentations. Yay, everyone, this was wonderful. To all the attendees for staying over with us a little bit and participating into today's webcast. Thanks so much to Jen, my co-panel leader, for helping me through this process with the first time. It's really been such a wonderful experience. We got a lot of questions about where you can find all of the papers. So when you go to the homepage for the conference, you will see a section labeled Proceedings, and there you can find all of the papers organized by panel. We captured a lot of questions that we weren't